All right. So this is only my second blogging cast.
Okay.
So I guess I should start off by asking you how you're doing. It's good to be polite.
I'm doing just fine. I am working too hard as usual, but then again, why else should we be alive? How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm about to have to pick up my son in about an hour and a half, and he's been having a rough week at school. So
what happened?
Samari is too much like his father, and so he's at school, acting up, doing things that he should not be doing. So I'm doing my best in impersonation of my father and trying to stay on him and make sure he does the right thing.
I hope he's not 17. We're talking about a young child.
No.
Okay.
Although at 17, not 17. At 16, I was still trying to figure out what to do. He's like 8. So.
Okay. Well,
we're hoping to get it straightened out before that.
I hope that works out, really. But
okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking today about your book, correct?
All about the beat. That's right. And okay. I know you and I probably don't feel the same way about all about the beat, and so we can talk about that.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes life interesting.
Yes, it does. Last time I checked, you think I'm a bully. Explain.
Oh, God. I should have went back and read the post. I can't even, in all honesty, I can't even remember why. Do you remember the context?
I think it was in your blog, and your idea was that I am taking an idea that people are waiting for a hip-hop revolution and beating up on that idea. And the idea, your idea was that I'm addressing only a white conservative audience, and so therefore there's nobody to go against me, that they don't get to hear the other side. And so I was just beating up on this idea that isn't valid anyway, and assuming that there wasn't going to be anybody to call me on mistakes. Is that accurate? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, partially. I should have looked at the post. But better yet, I'll just summarize. Because I went back and looked at the book actually this morning to get to my crucial argument. My big problem with the argument, and you can correct me if I'm getting this wrong here, but I think the basic idea is that hip-hop will not save black people. That hip-hop, as it's pretty much devoid as a political movement, as something to tell you what to do.
Right.
My big problem with that is, we all see these people who... if anybody's taking the subway here in New York sees these people who clearly believe in hip-hop too much and think that it'll do certain things that it probably will not. My big problem with that is that's true for virtually any form of music. And I'm not sure why we hold hip-hop to a higher standard. Certainly there are people who, as I said, expect hip-hop to do great things. But, I can't understand why hip-hop attracts this sort of attention. Now, that's not to say... From my perspective, that hip-hop is worthless, that it's done nothing. I've said on my blog several times that hip-hop actually taught me how to write. It taught me how to think. But that's not because, when It Takes a Nation of Millions came out, that was like a revolutionary moment for me. It doesn't define who I am, and I don't know that it defined who I was at that point.
Yeah.
But it taught me quite a bit, and so it just strikes me as harsh to say that, it's not worth anything, and it has no effect. I think... hip-hop, a lot of art, it's individual.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't define what the collective effect of it is.
Yeah.
But for me, it was a very personal thing.
Okay. You and I are diametrically opposed on this, but I think in a very interesting and constructive way. Now, you've made two basic points, which is that someone like me is making too much of a big deal out of the kind of person who is romanticizing the impact of their music, because people have said that about punk, people have said that about jazz. And then your other point seems to be that hip-hop can be useful. Those are exactly the 2 points that All About the Beat was meant to address. And this is the answer. First of all, a lot of the response to All About the Beat, to the extent that there's been one, has been that I am claiming that there is this idea that hip-hop is going to be a revolution, and that that's an idea that if anybody ever had, they gave up sometime around after Public Enemy. And I disagree, and the reason that I was moved to write a book about the whole subject is because it's not only that guy on the train. I don't mind the guy on the train who has the idea that hip-hop is some kind of religion. What does that hurt? What worries me is that our intellectual class are so caught up in that idea. And so in All About the Beat, in the beginning, I list various books written by people who are considered hard hitters. And I'm not going to mention their names now because I really am not interested in starting beefs with people, for all of my reputation for being, kind of trenchant. I'm really not into taking individual people and tearing them apart. And so, but there are all these people, very well-intentioned people, and their idea is that there is some sort of possible hip-hop revolution. That's in a lot of the titles of the books. I'll pick out one person, and this is not a beef, but Bakari Kitwana. And he is very smart. You read this stuff, but the idea is that there's something more. A shoe has not dropped. Now, the guy in the train who loves his music, I don't care. But when you have people teaching classes about this and writing books about this with this idea that hip-hop is more than just the joyous romp that it is, I worry because, I'm a former academic and somebody who at least tries to be a thinking person, I feel that this is dangerous and idle. And the reason for that is because, and I'm not going to go on much longer, that I feel that with all due respect to what you're saying, and I want to say this carefully, you say that hip-hop taught you to think. That's just what I am writing against. That kind of thought. Like, to the extent that you and I disagree on things.
What's so bad about that?
Lord forbid someone learns to think from Public Enemy. I don't think that's a good way to think because, and this is, I'm like done, 15 seconds. I think that kind of thinking creates unfocused cynicism that doesn't really give any way of helping poor black people a chance. So that whole way of thinking is what worries me, and that's what most of All About the Beat is about. So there.
Right. Well, I think there are 2 points. The first is there's a lot of different distance between literally a music starting a revolution and, it just being a joyous romp. I mean, I think art, again, I think this is very individual. I have no way of telling you collectively how people receive hip-hop. But, okay, so take your example, Public Enemy, for instance. It's not that from Public Enemy I learned all the solutions for the problems of black people. It's not like I actually think, well, I heard Black Steel in the age of chaos, and what needs to happen is, African Americans in prisons need to stage a riot.
Okay.
Like, that's what should happen. It's not a literal. It's that Public Enemy. I was 13 when that album came out, and so. And again, I only know how to talk about this in a very personal way.
Right.
I was 13 and. There were certain things that my parents had been telling me the whole time, specifically about critical thinking, about listening, about questioning what other people were telling you. But it's one thing to hear your parents say that. It's another thing to hear or to take from a peer group that idea. That just because you read it in a book, you should think about it. That there are other ways of, looking at the world. As, Chuck D said, but you check out the books they own. Do your research. Learn more. It doesn't mean that I necessarily had to agree with everything that Public Enemy said. Well, maybe at that time I actually did, to be honest. But I think there are 2 levels of this. Okay, if you listen to Public Enemy and or any, rapper, and you stop right there and you take all your knowledge about the world, from that, then you're probably going to be in trouble. But I think that's true of anything. If you listen to Kurt Cobain and you stop right there, you're probably going to be in trouble. If you listen to Bob Marley and you stop right there, you're probably going to be in trouble. If you just listen to Stevie Wonder and that's all you want to know about relationships and how to deal with women, you will probably be in trouble. So I don't think, hip-hop serves as an end-all, be-all. At least it didn't in my life. It was an introduction to certain skills. I mean, and to the other part of that, and this is just, again, as a writer, I mean, I still, today in my prose try to achieve some of the things that I heard people do in hip-hop. It's always impressed me in that sort of way. I think there's a lot to be taught, especially to young people, about imagination, about, wordplay, all sorts of things like that. I had a debate on my blog about, what's harder to write, a sonnet or, a really good hip-hop verse. And, it was just really interesting to see folks go back and forth. I just think, and I'm not, obviously I'm not one of these guys who, hip-hop is a big word. You defend some of the worst things that you hear in it, but it just strikes me as dismissive to view it in this really reductive way. Yeah. To say either it's going to save us, i.e. either it's going to start a literal revolution, or it's just about, jumping up and down. Like, it has to be one or the other. But see, there's a lot of room in between there. Yeah. And there are a lot of hip-hop acts that do a lot of different things. There's a whole range of people doing different stuff. And there are a lot of people who get struck all kinds of ways by it. So I think that's my big quote.
Right.
I feel like we're being really reductionist in that discussion.
Okay, now I hear you, but this is one where I'm going to push back a little bit on the idea that it's about the middle ground. And this is why. The kind of critical thinking that we're talking about, of course, everybody wants critical thinking, but it seems to me that if you take hip-hop and you kind of stir it all up, and so, of course, we're not talking about 50 Cent, but more like Public Enemy or Today Common or Kanye or The Roots, just stir it all together. There's a common element, and I think that the common element is what people like more than anything. The critical thinking is important, but what makes people like it is that there is the confrontational cadence, as Khalifa Sanneh put it so beautifully in a New Yorker piece about 7 years ago now. And the idea is that it's about confrontation. You say critical thinking, but I think there's a part of you that means question authority. What the people are telling you is not the whole story. Check their sources. Be always wary of what they say. And the idea really, as I've often written, is that it's a musical evocation of a middle finger stuck up in the air. Now, that might be constructive. It might be just to do it. So, 50 Cent, he's just got the finger stuck up. With the Roots, the finger is stuck up and they say more complicated things. But the idea is basically F-U-C-K. Now, I don't mean to sound reductive about that, but I'm saying the general appeal of the music is pugnacious. And I think for many people, and the idea is that, well, of course, pugnacious is certainly progressive. Who knows what you're going to pug against, but still it's progressive that you've been taught to question, that everything that they're telling you, or a whole lot that they're telling you, is bullshit. They're people who you're supposed to be angry at. Watch out, you live in a tough world, it's like a jungle sometimes. I think for a lot of people, it is self-evident that that is what, say, the young black child needs to hear, so that they don't get seduced, so that they won't be like sheep. I disagree. Talk about critical thinking. I don't think that middle finger is what helps us now. Now, this is important. That middle finger helped 40 years ago. Like, in a way, I would be more with you and people who agree with you if it were 1958. The middle finger is Montgomery. That's important. But nowadays, I look at something we both probably know something about, the Harlem Children's Zone, right here in New York. You look at what Jeffrey Canada, the black activist, did. And now the verdict is in, and some things are working better than others, but he's canvassed, I think it's 60 blocks, and he's basically trying to eradicate poverty and the things that create poverty within that zone. Now, I think both of us have probably read about the Harlem Children's Zone and probably visited it, and our hearts swell. But Jeffrey Canada's middle finger isn't stuck up. He is helping people. My heart swells to see people helped. I am mostly concerned about the fate of the black poor. I'm considered this evil black conservative. But really, what my work is about is that. And there's no middle finger. It's at the point where teaching somebody to be angry at white people, teaching somebody to be angry at the establishment, teaching somebody the term systemic racism and teaching them that that's what they're supposed to be angry about even if Barack Obama gets elected. I don't think it's constructive. And I think a lot of people hear me saying that and they think that I'm saying it because I didn't grow up in the ghetto. I think that people hear me saying it and I think that the message is crabbed by the fact that I don't have much of a black accent. I think there's a sense that because I know conservatives, it must mean that I don't think people should make some noise. It's none of those things. It's what helps the black poor. And since about 1970, I don't think that kind of aggressive cynicism helps. So no disrespect to you, but I feel that you would have been just as well off learning critical thinking from some other source because the anger isn't helping anybody anymore. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And especially the last one, I agree, but that's what I learned, that was what helped me, with critical thinking. Again, and I'm just going to go back to this point. I mean, I just find it hard. Certainly, pugnacity.
I think pugnacity.
Am I saying it right?
Pugnacity, yeah.
Okay, pugnacity. Certainly, that's a quality, and then probably an important quality in hip hop.
Central quality.
At first, I mean, this is music made by very young men to boys. I mean, boys to young men. That's the first thing, and so I think it shares that in common. With a lot of music that's geared towards youth. I mean, I'm no scholar on punk, but I know that much about punk. I know that much about, grunge. I know that much about heavy metal. So it shares that in common, but I don't think that's all, people are hearing. I mean, if I listen to something like, Miss Jackson, which is one of my favorite songs, something like, even Hey, I mean, I'm not quite sure what's pugnacious about that. I would never, sort of just reduce OutKast to that. Even something, is quote unquote gangster, I use that term very loosely, as like, Illmatic, Nas, or some of Wu-Tang stuff. Certainly there's an aggression there.
Yeah.
But that's not all you're hearing. And I'm quite sure that's not all, fans are. Anybody can, grab the microphone and say, fuck white people. Am I allowed to say?
I think we're allowed.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. Anybody can do that. Anybody could do that. But that's not, that's not how you become a great hip-hop artist, I think there's a lot more going on, than just that, And so I think sort of focusing in on that, I don't think it's super productive. The other thing is, I don't know that hip-hop, beyond, helping you get through the day, I don't know that hip-hop was made to help black people overcome poverty. I mean, I can tell you how it's helped
what are all these
me.
Intellectuals writing these books about revolution then for? That's what I need. They don't seem to know what you know.
Well, I tell you what, in defense of Bakari, I don't think Bakari would say hip-hop was made to help black people overcome poverty. I highly doubt that would be his argument.
Okay.
Now, I mean, I'm sure you know this as well as I do. When you're working with an editor on a book, sometimes you end up with titles, and books are given titles for certain reasons.
That is true.
So that happens. I mean, if left up to me, my book wouldn't have a title like that. So that happens. I can't fully defend those guys because I'm not in that world, and I'm not writing books like that either. But having said that, and I've had my sort of debates with those folks, specifically over Obama and that sort of thing. I know
you have, yeah.
But I don't know. Hip hop. It was never for me to a force for me to overcome racism. Or something that I thought. I mean, maybe when I was 19, I thought that, or maybe when I was 17, I thought that. I don't know. But when I play the stuff that I love now, it's no different to me than going back and rereading The Great Gatsby or going to the Met and looking at a piece of art. I mean, those things help me. They're better. They make me feel better about myself.
Mm-hmm.
They leave me thinking for long periods of time, and I think that's productive. But as a sort of mass organizing tool, I'd be very interested in who holds that to be true.
Well,
it just seems like a big burden to put on a music film.
It is a very big burden, and I think that if you read Bakari Katwana's main book, you'll find that, although I know what you mean about titles, I hate the titles of most of my books, but the thing is, he does mean that, and he's not some sort of zealot or some sort of hothead. The idea is that it's not necessarily that people are going to the studio and making the music for that purpose, but the idea is that we can take it and help make change. And you mentioned Miss Jackson and OutKast, and I'm so glad you did, because I consider OutKast to be, true geniuses. I mean, I think, one thing about the beat is it is not about how much I hate the music, and it's not that I know nothing about it. I love what they do, but, and Miss Jackson, love it to death. I remember the first time I listened to that album, that was what stuck out. But the fact is, it is not, to me, something that I would point a child to as evidence of how to deal with how life can be hard, because in between the choruses, and the chorus is very catchy, you'd have to be a chorus not to like that chorus. In between the chorus, the whole rapping in between, pugnacious, again. The whole way that hip-hop has to be delivered, the way rap has to be delivered, it's like he's trying to make an apology, but because of the confrontational cadence, he almost sounds like he's yelling at the woman. That's just the way it is. Now, I say that as somebody who loves that track, but I think a lot of people listen to it and they think, oh, this is the height of wisdom. This is ghetto sainthood. This is the way people should be thinking. No. If I was talking to Miss Jackson, I wouldn't use that tone, and I would hope that most people wouldn't. And I think that most people listen to that tone and they think that there's something authentic and warm and black about it. It worries me because that tone symbolizes to me something very seductive. It's fun to listen to somebody talk that way, but it doesn't create, and I'll bring in something else. Prisoner Reentry. You know, some things are more exciting to watch than others. Prisoner reentry is something that doesn't get talked enough about, but ex-cons often come out of jail, and they wind up back in there 10 minutes later because there's no support structure for them. Right. So now there are these efforts to bring ex-cons back into society. How do you get an ex-con an apartment? That's tough. How do you get an ex-con driver's license? I actually watched that being done one day. That's hard. And there are agencies that are doing it. Barack Obama is one of the people who wants to take that national. The Manhattan Institute is not this callous, right-wing place where nobody cares about black people. The Manhattan Institute's one of their main planks right now is helping prisoner reentry efforts in Newark. And so there are all sorts of things that right-wing think tanks can do.
Just learned something today.
And so I'm into that. Now, there you go. You have that right there. That's what's important. Now, take that confrontational cadence and apply that to prisoner reentry efforts, which I think are more important for ghetto Newark than anything else. And so, really, even where hip-hop is about other things, there's always that common denominator element. I want to ask you, do you think that the way that you're saying you learn to think, that you learn this critical thinking, what solution in your mind is one that would trace to what you learned from hip-hop's teaching you how to think? Like, you're looking at what ails black America, and your way of thinking is created by people like Chuck D, very well-intentioned people. What black solution right now is founded on that way of thinking in your mind? Question.
Again, it's like tough for me to answer that question in a general sort of way, because again, the way I received it was very personal. It was like, I can't tell you again, reading The Great Gatsby, what I learned, even like reading something, more overtly political, like The Grapes of Wrath, which, another book I can't tell you what I got from The Grapes of Wrath that I would apply to America to solve a particular problem. I just, I think here's part of the disagreement. I think you're looking for something more utilitarian from hip hop, and I don't know that it's for that. Again, if you had to talk to me 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 13, 14, I may well have sat here and said, yeah, well, here's something. You know what I mean? I've told you that prisoners should, riot and break out of prison. But I was a young man / boy, actually a boy at that point. And so to that extent, it was more, again, I think the notion of critical thinking, questioning when people, tell you, and not, I understand where you're getting cynicism from that, but I think there's some distance between questioning and actual, cynicism. One song I think about a lot is that's on Basic Instruction Before Leaving Earth at the end of Jizz's album, which is about a young man who is raised a Christian and raised in the church.
Wait, at the end of whose album?
It's the end of Jizz's album, of his first album, Liquid Swords. And so he's talking about how he's raised in the church. It's actually by Killer Priest. He's talking about how he's raised in the church and he's raised on Christianity. And one day, he has this deep spiritual awakening. And he decides that the truth, in fact, is 5% Islam. Now, I'm not religious at all, and I completely disagree. To that as a solution, as any sort of collective solution. But emotionally, when I heard that song, it touched a place in me of how I felt, of going through life a certain way and believing in one thing, and then some sort of revelatory moment happens, and you say, "Oh no, the world is bigger than what I thought it was." It's a moment of, being young and I guess a transition from youth to adulthood that I think all people have. Would I advise people to then go and become 5%ers? I certainly would not. But I think how can I say this? That the song expresses a particular moment. Miss Jackson, I would not play Miss Jackson for my son and say, here is how you deal with your mother-in-law or not mother-in-law or whatever. Right. I wouldn't say that. It's an expression of how a young man feels in a particular situation. Yeah. And I take it that way. And it's an eloquent, expression of how a young man feels
in its way,
in a particular situation. I think, if you listen to the song, as many times as I have, as somebody who actually has a Miss Jackson, sort of.
Right, right.
So it almost literally applies to me. On the one hand, you're right. Big Boy is very confrontational. And the first few times I heard, I had great problems with how he was dealing with the woman. Andre is a lot more reflective. And he's sitting back, trying to figure out how did things come to this. He thought he was going to be with this woman forever. Yeah. Now he has a child. Like, they're two different, ways. And that's why I actually think the song is good, because they're two different, sides of looking at how these two brothers are in this particular situation. So I would not play that for my son as a son. Here's a lesson for you here. But I would play it for him and say, son, what do you think about this? What do you think about how this man reacted to this particular situation? Have you ever felt like this? Can you relate to this emotionally in any sort of way? In other words, I don't think it's great in terms of morals. I don't think people should go to art, probably, period. I mean, this might be a broad statement, but I don't think we go to art for our morals per se. But we go to it to express how we feel in a particular situation.
Yeah.
And I think hip-hop does a great job, actually a pretty fantastic job, of expressing emotionally how African-American males feel in particular situations. I don't, but in terms of, and I know certain hip-hop acts say that they have the solution, but I think that should be taken with a grain of salt. There was a time in my life where I would have listened to Bob Marley's War and said, yes, this is how I feel about race in America or race in the world. But politically, it's bunk, but it may express how you feel in a particular situation.
Ta-Nehisi, I'd like to ask you something, because this is interesting. I'm trying to put myself in your head, which is what I always try to do, and I'm feeling, I can imagine, like if I were an actor, acting you. Like I hear coherence in what you're saying. But what is inside of me is a bone-deep suspicion of people being indignant more for the pleasure of it than because they want to solve a problem. And I think where that comes from is from reading civil rights history and seeing that while we look at a tape of the I Have a Dream speech and people clapping, what those guys really did was hard, roll-up-the-sleeves work on policy, on crafting their policy so that it could actually get passed, working with legislators. What they did was hard work. It was about the head and not the gut. Now we see the music and the speeches, and I think a lot of people think that was the main meal. That was only part of it. And I see, students protesting, black students protesting on college campuses for reasons that very often seem to be more about imitating those old newsreels than really addressing anything that means anything significant to anybody. And I see people celebrating a lot of hip-hop as, we politely disagree, but as being more important than it is. And it worries me because I really just think people are not realizing how hard change is. And this is what I want to ask you. I've always read you and found that your work, your perspective sounds to me like you would be older than you are. I detect in a lot of your writing, and far beyond hip-hop, this bone-deep distrust of the white man, correct me if I'm wrong, a sense that racism is very much still out there, and that, to be enlightened is to realize that it is, and we can talk about Geraldine Ferraro and a piece that you wrote about her. Bone deep. It's really there in you. And it makes me think, why is it that you and I are not that different in age, and we think so differently? Because as quiet as it's kept, there are many, 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 many black people who see things my way. I don't feel remotely hunkered down as the enemy that many people seem to describe me as. I've got people listening to me. And there are many people who hate me, but there are just as many who think that I'm normal. And I'm thinking, well, I grew up in a certain way, and there were always white people around, and I don't know, there's a part of me that just isn't scared of people. I don't know, white people don't scare me. Never have. I was telling my school teachers when I was 4 that I was smarter than them, literally, and in those words, white school teachers. So it's clearly I'm crazy in that way. And I want to ask you, there's a piece you wrote a long time ago that I remember about the police and how you and your friends felt about the police. I think you wrote it for the Village Voice. Remember that piece?
Yes.
And I thought, this is him. This is why he thinks the way he does, despite not being 60 or 65 and having never known Jim Crow. Do you think that your view of what black America needs to know and how black America should think was founded upon the way the New York police used to treat young black men? Is that a founding element in your worldview?
Well, we gotta go back to something you said, and that is a bone deep trust of the white man.
Yeah, I mean it. Is that accurate?
No. First of all, the white man pays my bills right now. I work for the Atlantic, or white men, very rich white man pays my bills right now, and I work for the Atlantic.
But maybe he's just one of the good ones. But
No, certainly not so. Certainly not so. I mean, there are two things here. Okay, I can talk about me as an individual first of all. I've written before. I'm from West Baltimore. I had no white friends until I was about 20 years old. I think anyone who grows up in any sort of segregated environment, part of that is prejudice. I mean, it has not. I don't think it has anything to do actually. Maybe a loose connection to some sort of political struggle, but I mean, when you grow up around people who are not like you, and you know them from TV, and you know them from, as good as books are, you know them from books, you know them from music, you form certain ideas in your head, and I just think that that's generally true. I don't know how much that has to do with, what I write. Again, like I see myself as a writer, as a work in progress. So if you, looked at something that I wrote 5 years ago, it may not be what I would say today. If you look at something I wrote 10 years ago, it may not be the same as what I would say today. A broad distrust of white people, I don't think is part of my aesthetic. Having said that, and this I guess gets us to the other topic we were talking about. And that is, what is racism? What sort of forms do racism come in? I'm reading a very interesting book right now, and I'm gonna, I'm gonna blank on the name of it. I got it on my.
It's always like that, yeah.
It's about slavery after slavery. God, slavery by any other name. That's the name of the book. Mm-hmm. And it's basically about the debt peonage system, and just basically how the South conspired to continue slavery even after slavery. I think what a lot of African Americans bring to the table, not all, a lot of African Americans bring to the table when we talk about this is they're not inclined to give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think
who?
Well, when we're talking about racism, white people, they're not inclined to give white people the benefit of the doubt when it comes to racism.
Okay.
And that, has certain historical roots. I mean, one of the interesting things we always talk about is, we live in an era today where we don't have, a brutal sort of Jim Crow, racism. This is not 19... But what we always miss is, in 1968, while there were various, very obvious forms of racism, the things that really hurt African Americans were not obvious. Mm-hmm. They weren't obvious at all, in fact. Redlining. Mm-hmm. It wasn't, necessarily somebody putting up a sign saying, don't come here. Mm-hmm. The whole... convict lease labor thing I was just talking about in, slavery by any other name. Mm-hmm. They didn't say we're putting you in jail because you're black. They said we're putting you in jail because you broke the law. It's never been overt. The line has always been moved. There's always been, a situation in which people say, well, it's not really your race. It's because of this. When lynchings were rampant in the South, it wasn't because black people were black. It was because they were ostensibly going after white women, and raping white, not even wanting to marry, but raping white women. That was and whole middle class communities in the South were burnt down.
Why is this important? I don't mean
it's
that
important because I'm giving you a historical context for why I think a lot of African Americans today are not inclined to give the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
Now, having said that, I do want to add one addendum to that. And I wrote about this on the blog today. I am still grappling with what it means that Barack Obama won Iowa. And what it means that, Barack Obama could go. And I know people have all sorts of fancy analysis for this about white Appalachia, and that sort of good thing. And, that's accurate, fine. But the fact of the matter is, if you had told me he was going to do it 4 years ago, I just wouldn't have believed
right.
you. And I'll be honest about that. I just wouldn't have believed you, period.
You're not the only writer who was really thrown by that. Yeah.
Right. No. So I'm in a process of getting that figured out. At the same time, I do think, we have to be patient with people. And I do understand, why folks are somewhat skeptical. I mean, we can talk about the Geraldine Ferraro piece in particular.
Yeah.
But there's a history of this. And racism has never, in its most destructive forms, and I'm certainly not, offering an apology for Jim Crow. In its most destructive forms, it was never particularly overt.
And the thing is, what I question in a lot of my work is why... at this point, we have to spend so much time talking about this racism, which certainly exists. It's not that it doesn't exist. Racism is around. I think it always will be. And I am beginning to sense a lack of pride in our race in that the whole issue of whether racism exists and in what form is considered such a hot topic. Like, for example, just now, as a linguist, I couldn't help noticing that your vocal tempo picked up and your voice got a little higher. That issue excites you. Like, is not excite as in makes you happy, but it's something that you have very urgent feelings about. Is there racism? Why don't white people realize that there is still racism? How can we convince white people that there is? And as far as I'm concerned, one, I don't think we're going to convince white people to any significant extent that racism is more important than they think it is. And two, and this is the most important thing, I don't think we need it. You know, the Harlem Children's Zone is not going to do better or worse depending on how white people feel about black people deep down. I don't think prisoner reentry efforts are contingent upon that either. I mean, to the extent that we're often hearing that the system doesn't care about black people, why is that bill even in Congress? It seems like something's going on. It's white people who started it up. And it's a Republican administration that's been quietly working on things like that. It goes under the radar. And so I don't see why we have to talk about racism so much unless there's a part of us that is hurt by the notion that white people don't exactly see all of us as princes of men and women. And so I just think that racism to me is not terribly interesting, especially when maybe we are assigning it beyond what it is. Like, for example, you said that when Geraldine Ferraro said that Barack Obama was only getting as far as he was because of his color, you had a piece, very eloquent piece in its way, but you were saying, I remember reading that piece and thinking, I'll never be able to write like this. And I'm not just saying this to be polite. Really, I mean, it was good.
Bang your head against the wall a few times, you'll get it. Trust me.
I was thinking the pacing, the wording, but you were saying that it was racist of her, and you were impatient with her denying that it was racist and that anybody would deny it. And, you know, as you know, both of us are Obama fans, and I think we probably like him for very similar reasons. But for her to say that as a Hillary supporter at a time when there was possibly a chance that Hillary might take the nomination, I don't think that was racist at all. Her saying that did not mean that she doesn't like black people or that she was disparaging black people's abilities, because, as we can both admit, I think, if Barack Obama weren't black, we wouldn't know about him right now. We might know about him in 15 years, but can you really say that his color hasn't actually helped him? I mean, that's what it was in Iowa. This is a weird election where being black has actually helped, because there are white people who, for all sorts of reasons, like him partly because he's a pretty color. Geraldine Ferraro said that. Now, a couple of years ago, I wrote a piece saying that about Barack Obama, and boy, people did not like that. You know, this was one time when it was white people, you know, hating on me. They thought this was just terrible. Since then, I've had plenty of white people admit it to me, because it's just true. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with it. But wouldn't you agree that if he weren't black, we wouldn't know who he was yet? Or am I out of court on that?
Well, there are a couple of things there. First of all, just I'm going to back up a little bit. The point you made about why is racism important or is it not? In fact, I'm one of these people who actually doesn't try to spend his time going around proving to white people that, you know, that they should recognize racism. I'm much more interested in whether the drug war is effective than whether it's racist. That's how I feel. At the same time, I don't begrudge people who consider racism their particular fight, any more than I begrudge people who consider sexism to be their particular fight, any more than I, begrudge people who think anti-Semitism is their particular fight. I'm not clear on how my way of looking at the world, or Jeffrey Canada's way of looking at the world, is necessarily in conflict with what the NAACP is trying to do. Even though I've been critical of the NAACP too.
That's right.
I don't necessarily think that those two things are in conflict. And as to the specific point about Geraldine Ferraro, I actually would disagree with you on two counts. One, if he were white, he just wouldn't be Barack Obama. That's true.
Well, that's pretty abstract, yeah.
All comparisons. So I don't really know how to compute that. The second is I have no way of assessing whether his quote-unquote blackness is doing more harm than it is good. I don't know how, we reach that conclusion.
Harm, now that's a harder one, yeah.
And specifically for Geraldine Ferraro, again, my problem, she basically, said that the reason why, and I wish if I could Google, I would get you the exact quote. But she basically said that the reason why he was winning was because he was black. Now, to get to that, you have to disregard a whole lot of other things that are also true about Barack Obama. The fact of the matter is, Al Sharpton was black. But Al Sharpton couldn't even get black votes in South Carolina, much less white votes. So to me, it is extremely reductive to say that his color is the reason why, this is true. In fact, that might be the essence of racism, and that was actually not might be. I argue that, in fact, that is the essence of racism, because what you're saying is, minus some leg up, Barack Obama could not compete with Hillary. And I can't tell you that he could, but what I'm saying is I need demonstrable proof for why that's true. If you're saying that race is the only reason, or even to me that is racism. Quite literally. You're saying that race is why this is the case, and minus that, he couldn't compete.
No. I don't think we necessarily need to take her as meaning that. It's not race is the only reason. It's that it tipped the scale. So yes, the man is brilliant. Yes, the man has a...
But John, that's not what she said.
But
that's not what she said, though.
But if she says the reason he's winning is because he's black, it's a little bit approximate, but the fact is, if you took away his color, he wouldn't have been there.
But if you took away his ability to articulate and to be a great speaker, he wouldn't be there either. There are about 5 other things you could take away, too.
But the fact of the matter is, she's making a statement about his color. Now, I suppose she could have said, well, if he wasn't so articulate and if he wasn't so brilliant.
She could.
But the fact
if he hadn't gone to an Ivy League, if he hadn't been editor of a Harvard Law,
this is the point.
There's about 5 other things.
But Hillary Clinton, too, is an articulate person. Hillary Clinton's not stupid either. And I don't know if you and I disagree on this, but I think really in terms of qualifications, in many ways she was more qualified than him just because she's been around longer, meaning that color, in this case, was the variable that was relevant to discuss. I'm sure General
we strongly disagree on this, and I'm gonna let you finish because I'm cutting you off. Go ahead. I'm gonna stop.
Well, do you disagree about the Hillary versus Barack qualification issue?
Again, I have no way. I think qualifications are what people decide. I don't think there's a rule book that says you need X, Y, and Z to be president.
Well, then, if you believe that,
if you win the primary, especially in an election, the qualifications are, did you win?
Okay.
And he won. And, just to address this particular point about, how it played out.
If you think that the issue of who was more qualified, either Hillary or Barack, is that abstract, then certainly we're not going to agree on Geraldine Ferraro's comment. But I thought of it as 2 people of pretty much equal powers in a great many ways, where one person got ahead. And I think that to a considerable extent that was because of a certain novelty value, because of a certain desire many white people have to show that they are not with the sins of the past. Now, this is important. I'm almost done. Yes, I think Barack Obama is a brilliant candidate. And I think that his color helped him in this case, that it's a sign that we are gradually getting past racism. And that's just a historical accident. History is messy. I don't begrudge him the fact that his color helped him get ahead. But I think that it did, and I think that just because a woman who's white and not young and not terribly soothing said it, doesn't mean that there was racism in the air. She just stated a fact because her candidate was losing, and she resented the fact that Hillary Clinton didn't have a pretty skin tone and a diversity to put her over the edge. It was a close race. No?
But John, I feel like this is really reductive. That ignores the fact that Obama had a team around him that understood caucus rules like Hillary did not. That, she didn't have a plan after, Super Tuesday. That had she come out against the war, it's highly likely that, there would have been a Barack Obama. Had she even just moved back home to Illinois and run for the Senate from there, there probably would never be a Barack Obama. There are about 20 other things that could have stopped Barack Obama, or that ultimately helped Barack Obama. And those things are, demonstrably true. Again, if they had not executed the caucus system the way they would have lost. It's just that simple.
Oh,
if Barack Obama had been for the war, what would, he probably would have lost. I'm not going to say definitely, but he probably would have lost. So, again, my point is, by fixating on race, by saying race is the singular reason, or as we can go to what you said, the tipping point for it, there are about 20 other tipping points. I don't know why we're fixating on that one.
Well, you're looking at the whole thing. And, Obama ran a brilliant campaign. It's not that his color was the only advantage that he had by any means, but I'm talking about the fact that he was on the stage at the beginning. I think many people would agree, many of them black, that the fact that he was even presented to us so early, when just 4 years ago barely anybody had ever heard of him except for the speech that he made at the Democratic Convention, the fact that he got so far and could raise so much money so quickly, part of that was because of what his color means to a lot of white people. Witness, for example, Iowa. Now, after that, sure, there were all sorts of things. It's not that his blackness carried him through to the nomination. And in fact, I think it hindered him sometimes when it came to things like the whole Reverend Wright business. But the fact that we knew him and that he came so far, as opposed to, for example, John Edwards, rather similar message, also telegenic. Of course, no one knew he was going to have the scandal. And so he just didn't get as far. And talk about blackness again, part of Obama's articulateness, part of it, is that he has a bit of preacherly cadence. People like listening to a black voice. And I think that that helps him go far with white audiences as well as black audiences. And so blackness, I think, mattered. It's a wonderful thing, but I just want to clarify, I mean in the beginning. I'm not talking about what's happened during this year. You don't think so? You think that he would have gotten just...
I just think that there are things that I definitely know helped him get on that stage, and it's very difficult for me to assess whether him being black more helped him than it hurt him, more hurt him than it, didn't help him. But I know that being articulate definitely helped him. I know that getting into an Ivy League law school, almost certainly helped him. I know that, having virtually no competition, in a Senate race for Illinois, that definitely has no, debate about that at all. I don't have to, sit here and weigh, maybe not. But race, I think, is just so much more complicated. It's just, now I wouldn't sit here and say that, race, it's funny because in the general, there have been all sorts of debates about, is racism helping him, is racism hurting him? And to the extent that I've come down, and I haven't come down hard, I'm not even prepared to really argue this.
Right.
I'm kind of back and forth on that, whether it's helping him, whether it's, I don't know, because again, I got to tell you, and I'm being really clear about this. I did not expect him to win, and I did not expect him certainly to win in the way that he won.
Yeah.
I just didn't expect, it to go down in the way that it did. But I just think race and racism is one of these really complicated, convoluted things. And they're much more, I'm on, the Occam's razor thing. They're much more simpler explanations that are just demonstrably true. And so why people go to this big, complicated, algebraic formula and say, that's it, that's the answer.
Yeah.
When, they're much more simpler answers that are just clear, that we just know to be true. I mean, there's just no debate. I don't think, we would debate that if he couldn't, if he wasn't articulate, that he would be where he was. I don't think we would debate that had he been pro-war, he probably would not have been successful. I don't think we would debate had he had actually, somebody credible running against him in the Senate race, that he wouldn't be where he was. I think that we end up in this game of, what could have been or what would have been or what was. And it's very difficult to disentangle, I think.
Ta-Nehisi, in some ways, we are very different. It's interesting. You were surprised by Iowa. I had Obama pegged as the victor early in 2007. I was making bets with people. I won $100 from one person. I knew it was going to be this way. What I've been grappling with is why people like you were so surprised by Iowa. I knew it was going to be that way. And yet...
Well, I mean, allow me to just... Because that's an interesting question. Because what you have to do when you're wrong about something like I was wrong about it, you have to go back and reassess.
Yeah.
I've never been to Iowa. See, one of the things that happens with black folks, again, is your experiences are limited as much by what has actually happened to you or what you actually know to be true.
I think so.
By your perception of what might be true. So you think Iowa, all white people, no way a black dude is going to win, out there. And I got to tell you,
but it's Obama.
And this is true. Yes, well, I mean,
He's
and that's
magic.
what I'm saying. It's and I got to tell you that I think in general, if you want to talk about a great moment in terms of race, I think a lot of black people, I hope a lot of black people are going to have to sit back and reassess what we think of the country, what we think of white people, how our willingness to generalize
it's a crucial moment.
Ourselves, while at the same time complaining about people generalizing about us.
Yeah.
I had a post on my blog. It's very interesting because there's this whole thing about Sarah Palin, is she a redneck? Is she not a redneck? And people talking about how she named her kid Willow and named her kid Track, and that was evidence of her being, quote unquote, white trash or what have you. And I was telling her, I said, I had no idea that Willow was the sort of name that white people looked at and said, oh, that's a trashy name. So I'm saying that to say that one of the things that's come out of this election for me is I've learned to respect the complexity and the diversity and, as I say on the blog, the different tribes of whiteness among white people and their own sort of internecine, things that they have between each other, things that, are just not apparent to you if you come from the west side of Baltimore, go to, an all-black school, very happy that I went to Howard. Yeah. But, you don't always see things that way.
Ta-Nehisi, I want to ask you something, because we have gone past the 45-minute point, but it's something I've always wanted to ask you. I want to be able to craft my message better, and I'm going to bring up one more thing that you wrote. And I hope you don't feel put on the spot, but I really mean this constructively. I have never had any anger with you, but here's something that you wrote. For a young black boy coming up in these times, I'd play Illmatic, De La Soul is Dead, the infamous word life 500 times over before I'd offer him a single word written by John McWhorter. Now, why? What did I do? What is so terrible? And I really mean that as a question. Right. Now that we've talked and we can kind of see what's in each other's heads, and we're talking about diversity, there's a diversity of black views. What is so poisonous about my writing that it would lead you to write something like that?
Nothing. That was tremendously unkind.
This is not the answer I was expecting. I'm really thinking there must be something about what my intentions seem to be.
No, blogging is a very immediate thing. You don't have editors. Sometimes you write emotionally, and the worst things you say are... Now, I strenuously disagree with your book.
Okay.
I strenuously disagree with your book, so I'm not,
sure.
And it doesn't even need that. It doesn't really... It was tremendously unkind. That's the bottom.
I didn't expect... That's not what I was waiting to hear. But, no, it's okay. It's rough and tumble out there. But I have always been perplexed by that line. I really found myself thinking, I wonder what he read or what I said that would mean that my work would not be fit for the eyes of a child. And so I was just wondering. But we are, it's 51 minutes. And
we've gone long,
I think we've gone kind of long. And you have to pick up your child. And I have to run into the city and enjoy the fact that for now I don't have a child yet. This has been fun. I think we should do more of these, actually.
Yes, we should.
Like, thanks, after Obama gets elected, I think that you and I should do one of these and talk about its implications.
Yes, I'd be in for that.
Good. So, have a great day, Ta-Nehisi.
Okay, likewise.